The Initiative for Literacy in a Digital Age was established in 2014 to build upon research on the contemporary literacies people need and acquire to succeed in complex environments within and beyond schools. Now that we are 2 decades into the 21st century, and in light of the ever-evolving literacy landscapes, we ask a simple question: what's next? Join us as leaders from the National Council of Teachers of English, the International Society for Technology and Education, and the Initiative for Literacy in a Digital Age Divergent Award honorees share their literacy journeys and best thinking on where our field is currently and where we go from here.
If you were to ask me before March 1st, 2020, what makes the Educator Collaborative divergent, I would say that it's our embrace of digital tools to create learning spaces for a wide range of literacy educators. From diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, diverse positions, and diverse locations. Our community, our members, our associates, continue to be folks from all over the world that every month learn together online.
I was a high school English teacher, and I spent a lot of time as a high school English teacher trying to integrate technology into my classroom. I had a bank of computers that I inherited that came with my classroom, essentially. And what I tried to do was provide opportunities for kids to create and explore online using online tools. Now, if you think about this was before like Google Docs. This was before Drive was a thing. This was before we had like a lot of one-to-one programs throughout the country. And so when we were thinking about, when we were in this environment and we were thinking about what it meant to be literate in the 21st century, really we had to think beyond that time period and think about what our kids are going to need in their future work and what it actually meant. It was a lot of self-reflection about what it actually meant to be literate in the 21st century. Now, obviously that has changed. Obviously we are in a different time now. It's been 13 years-ish since we created that first draft. And since then we've had another draft. And then now we're in our third iteration of this definition. And we changed our approach a lot from the 21st century to the digital age. Because the 21st century is this period, it's a defined period of time, but the digital age kind of lends itself to the era in which we see ourselves. And so as I think about my own experiences, this definition, this literacy for the digital age definition has shifted a lot of my work. And that experience of writing that first draft really caused me to think deeply about just that question. What does it mean? What does it mean for students to be literate when we are introducing them to new tools and new forms of consuming media and new forms of creating text and multimedia and video and all the different tools that come with that? So what does it mean when we talk about literacy? And those things that we hold tried and true to literacy, while they're still valid, they're still completely valid, and they are the base for what we're talking about. That doesn't mean that we can suggest that this idea of the digital age, that we just layer technology on top of these things.
My work as a literacy educator is informed by being a Black woman who grew up in the 70s and 80s in what I would call Black Milwaukee. Milwaukee was and still is one of the most segregated cities in the country. My work is informed by being a Black mother to a Black son, now a young man pursuing a writing and literature major, currently learning and doing school remotely. Much of my work and identity as a literacy educator is informed by what I learned raising him and navigating his education journey. I am from a family of Black women educators and community organizers and activists, so I really don't know any other way to be. The Black women in my family and in my community raised me. I am also an avid reader and a writer. Black women writers taught me and continue to teach me, from Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Zora Neale Hurston, Octavia Butler, Jessamine Ward, Tayari Jones, Zadie Smith. There's so many that I can name. I could go on and on. I love to write, I love to read, and to make meaning of text, films, music, art, performance. Creating, composing, thinking, reflecting, that is life for me. I am passionate about it, and I've always wanted to share my passion and joy with others, with young people.
If you know me, you've probably already heard me say that education is the family business where I come from. My mother had a 40-year career as an elementary teacher and principal. She was my 5th grade teacher, still the best one I've ever had. Her mother was her principal, and her grandmother was her kindergarten teacher. Her one sister taught 4th grade for her entire career before she retired, and her son, my cousin Ryan, is currently a high school principal in Southern Maine. My entire career is, in essence, a contribution to a lifelong conversation with the people I love the most about the issues that we care about the most. I have a long history of using summer as a time to connect with other people and get smarter. This dates back to my first paid job in education at age 19, when I was a residential counselor in a summer aspirations program directed by my mother. A few years later, when I was in graduate school, I was a member of a teacher research group, school-wide collective, that went into the Maine woods for an entire week with a truckload of data about students' literacy learning that ultimately resulted in a collaboratively authored book that I'm really proud of still. Those early experiences cemented my sense that the best way to make instructional improvement was for teachers to band together into inquiry collectives and to figure things out together rather than having answers imposed on them from outside experts or publishers or policymakers.
I can begin with a story my mom used to tell me about how somewhere probably around kindergarten or 1st grade, supposedly I had set up a small schoolhouse. We had a chalkboard in my playroom and small chairs and stuffed animals and all kinds of things like that. And from there, it just continued on. I always enjoyed working with others, especially in high school. I was able to serve as a coach for what was then Odyssey of the Mind. I think the new name for that is Destination Imagination. That was an interesting experience, also serving as a camp counselor. And then in college, when I got to Michigan State, I had the opportunity to work at the Michigan State Writing Center, and I was also encouraged in one of my methods classes to join the National Council of Teachers of English. And so that is where my roots began as an English educator, both in the Writing Center and becoming a member of NCTE, of which I have been a member now for the better part of 3 decades.
So I am forever a middle school teacher at heart. I love teaching. I love working with middle level learners and striving to empower them as critical consumers of information. My passion for middle level education brought me to focus on how we might continue striving to meet the needs of middle level learners in this ever growing world of virtual education. I know it's not new. Virtual education's been around since the 90s, believe it or not. So prior to COVID, Paul and I were actually engaged in research and teaching that centered around finding ways of engaging and motivating middle-level learners within this virtual classroom. So our questions were, how might we work with educators to ensure that we're adapting our practice to meet the unique needs of these learners within this digital classroom space? And I think that's what brought us to this particular work. You know, we wanted to provide a text that would assist teachers in adapting their literacy practices for this new space, this new virtual context.
And I'm going to piggyback on that and add to it. We definitely want to provide a text that would assist teachers. And I think we were also thinking about our own practices as teacher educators. How can we prepare our future teachers to teach in this virtual context? So as Brooke mentioned, she's, forever passionate about middle level. And while I have middle level experience, my passion lies more with secondary students, high school students. The majority of my teaching has been spent working with students who were deemed, and I don't like to use the word at risk, but I'm going to, and I'm going to quote it, at risk, because they had difficulties performing on a state assessment. And so my experience in the classroom led me to pursue advanced degrees in adolescent literacy as a way to serve their needs.
I began as a classroom teacher. I was a middle grades and high school classroom teacher. I found myself often asking questions about technology use in my classroom. I wondered why I could not have a paperless system for my students to be able to search and write and create materials and send them off to peers for review, and then send them off to myself as the classroom teacher or the public to get feedback and make change based upon what they can create on their computers. This is before Google Docs. I feel like for the most part, I'm still looking for that perfect system to make that a reality. It tends to be one of those common areas that I try to improve. But generally, across my work and across my areas of research and education, I focus on innovation, I focus on participatory teaching, I focus on participatory scholarship, I focus on community engagement in digital and hybrid spaces. I generally have a specific need to help students think about who they are, the communities they live in, and how they engage with the world.
I have been learning to teach for 24 years now, and I have many more years in which I think I will be trying to figure all of this out. And technology has played a role in that for me, because when I first came into the classroom, there was a computer sitting on my desk. And I'll be honest, that computer wasn't really good for much. It had a very large spider plant growing on top of it, and I was completely comfortable with allowing that spider plant to grow for a few years. I started as a middle school English teacher, teaching just north of Washington, D.C. in a humanities and communications magnet program. And that magnet program allowed us to get inside the standards, but have the freedom and the autonomy to create instruction that was multidisciplinary, that was multimodal, that was very experiential in nature. The world was our textbook. And in learning how to teach in such a space that honored freedom, you would think that the digital would just immediately plug right in there, but it was still pretty early, right? It was the late 90s. And as somebody who didn't really have a computer at home, I wasn't somebody who came to this technology in a playful manner. However, that changed. I, in my second year, met a kiddo named Elliot. Elliot was a brilliant coder. Elliot spoke HTML like it were a language. And well, it is a language, but we could converse in HTML, which was brilliant and fun, and yet sat in this space for me where I wasn't quite sure how to lever that in my English classroom. So I started inviting Elliot to come in for lunch every day. And I was working on a website. I was trying to build my first web quest. I was working in GeoCities. I had no idea what I was doing. And Elliot was my coach. And through that work, I also started turning my classroom computer around to face the kids. So initially it was the teacher computer. I was supposed to use it for grades and for email. And in working with Elliot, I learned that I could turn it around and maybe we could do searches together to find information. It was the early days of the web, so there wasn't a whole lot to necessarily find, but yet there was. So we started working together. We started going into the lab and creating content. We were working to do presentations inside of tools that don't exist anymore, with HyperCard and HyperStudio. But we were learning how to take our stories and tell them through different modalities in a way that helped us add dimension and depth and connection to the work that we were doing. And that was the early days of doing this work. I still remember the first grant that I wrote was to the PTA to get enough money to get VHS tapes, because we were working with iMovie 1.0, and we could save students' digital stories to these VHS tapes. And I wanted to send them home. And that was the first time that I really thought about authentic audience in a completely new and different way in my teaching. I had Writing Project as a community to keep me engaged in thinking about the pedagogies and practices that weren't about the tools. But then I started trying to marry the two things together. The year that Elliot graduated, he gave me this little placard that kind of hangs still in my classroom. And it's yellowed with age now in some ways. But I remember sitting with this and being like, Elliot, what does this mean? I'm a techie? What is that? Because I had taken it to mean gamer, or somebody who understood how the motherboard inside of their laptop worked. And Elliot explained to me what's been at the core of my practice ever since, that all of this is about play, and that he had helped me learn how to play. And that's what a techie could do. I call it tinkering now, so I'll cite Henry Jenkins in that work.
So, like many literacy teachers, I'm driven by my passions for language as a writer and lover of literature. Growing up in the multilingual and multicultural city of New York, linguistic variation had been a consistent point of curiosity, and it was also always a delight for me. So there was a book called The Friends by the author Rosa Guy, and it was my all-time favorite book as a child. It was the first time that I had seen myself, that I had really felt seen in a text, all the parts of me, not just some parts. It was the first time that I had read a nuanced, authentic depiction of African-American and West Indian friendships in New York City that reflected my own lived experience. And in this depiction moved beyond ethnocentric and anti-immigrant narratives that are still kind of prevalent. So in college, I was fortunate to take a sociolinguistics course on African-American vernacular English, where I learned a meta-language to describe my own rich cultural heritage. And I also learned tools to be able to defend this linguistic heritage against racist discourses. So all in all, I think that my work as my interest as a student throughout the years, and also my later work as a middle school teacher, eventually in a teacher educator, they've all continued on the same path of really celebrating linguistic diversity and working to create educational spaces that are truly inclusive of all students.
You know, my journey to become who I am as a literacy educator today really started with, my roots and as a child and as a young adult. And so, I identify as a white, temporarily able-bodied, cisgender and heterosexual woman. I was raised in the Midwest United States, and my community reflected a primarily white, Eurocentric worldview. And so it was through my education in college that I really received a critical education, that really transformed my worldview and helped me critically self-reflect on privileges and resource inequities that I had benefited from as a white woman who attended well-resourced schools. And so I really entered this work through critical education, and because of that, I really believe in the power of the transformative power of critical conversations and critical pedagogies for building a more humane and just world. My goals also as a literacy educator, bring me to this work, and, through my own personal histories, have shaped these goals. And so, my goals are really to promote linguistic pluralism in ELA classrooms and promote reading, writing, and talking about literature to engage in anti-racism, anti-Blackness, and dismantling white supremacy.
When I thought of this question, I started thinking about myself as a high school English teacher in Texas. And one of the things that I was always interested in doing was having critical conversations with students. And the way we define that is conversations about power and privilege in relation to current events, students' lives, literature that we're reading in class. And as a white female teacher, I often asked myself in a classroom with students that came from various backgrounds, I asked myself, am I doing this in a helpful way, in a productive way? Or are these conversations sometimes harmful? And if so, what can I do about it? And I really carried these questions with me to my classroom as a teacher educator, where I also fostered critical conversations with my students. But the questions just became more robust. And, I started asking, why are some of my students silent? Why are some of them talking a lot? Should I be asking more pointed questions? Should I be more assertive? Should I be more laid back? Should I let that comment go and address it in a one-on-one conversation? And so really, critical conversations became more complex as I practiced them more and more with my students. And so what brought me to this particular research project was my desire to unpack it and to become better at it. And so, I wanted to be better at fostering them with my own students, graduate and undergraduates, but then I also wanted to model it so that my students would then do it with their own students in their classrooms.
I would say that what brought me to this work was the reality that I kind of had some rough schooling, and I wanted to be the teacher that I never really had, that I should have had, that I deserved. And so, one of the words I would say that motivate me is this idea of restoration. And so I think that one of the reasons why I teach is to help restore and heal a lot of the harm that our educational system has caused, while also celebrating the fun things that go with teaching, right? And part of the journey meant having to go back and starting to teach, at least for me, where I had gone to high school. And that was hard. Then I ended up having colleagues who were some of the same teachers I had faced when I was a student. And so it's been a journey, it's been a process, and I've taught now 6th through 12th grade, all grade levels, both public and private. And I think that range of experience has allowed me to just develop so many different skill sets for working with all types of young people. And so I feel really equipped to support young people wherever I am. And I feel pretty confident about being an educator as a result. And so that continues to be my motivation. I'm fighting for restoration, I'm fighting for healing and freedom for all of us.
I think my journey to becoming an educator is a little different from Lorena's. Looking back, if you had asked me when I was in school, I would have said I was having a great school experience because in many ways, the school system worked for me, provided that I was able to assimilate to its ideals. And it would only be later when I became an adult that I looked back and realized the ways in which my own cultural upbringing and identity were not necessarily valued in school. And I think that has really been what has informed my teaching in my career. In terms of what brought me to the profession, though, I will say that I am a big believer in education and in public education. I believe that public education can be a vehicle for social justice and change. I don't believe it's lived up to that potential. In its history, public education has done more to harm and marginalize students who come from different backgrounds that are not in the dominant culture and primarily white and Eurocentric. But I do still believe in the project and the goal of public education. And I think that's what sustains me and keeps me in this work. And I'm hoping through the work that we do with Disrupt Text and with all the other educators we've been able to connect to throughout the country that we can build something and, like Lorena said, restore maybe like the dignity of what public education can be.
My journey to becoming an educator really happened because I was a para first, and then I decided I wanted to do something, share a love of literature with students, because that was something that I just always grew up loving, reading. I was the kid who would have a book and be in the corner ignoring everybody at the party that my parents were hosting, and I would just be there with a book, reading voraciously. So I wanted to share that love of reading with young people. And then the longer I was a language arts teacher in the public school system, the more I saw that students really, a lot of them did not love reading. They didn't love the things that we were assigning them to read anyway. So about, I want to say 2018, the opportunity to become a librarian happened, and I just jumped right at it because the district library director, a friend of mine, her name's Janet Damon, she came into my classroom one day, and I was just so emotional because I had just been reprimanded for giving my students 20 minutes of sustained reading time at the beginning of class. And I was told that that wasn't something that they needed to be doing in honors classes, that they didn't need time to read what they wanted to read independently at the beginning of class. That was basically, I was wasting time, giving them time to read. And that was really difficult. And so I was so emotional. And Janet just said, we're thinking about opening back up the library. If we were to do that, would you be interested in being the librarian? And that was like a no-brainer. Yes, absolutely, of course. So she helped me, and so many other people who had been librarians in the district took me under their wing. And the first year, they just really taught me a lot about what it meant to be a librarian. And I'm still learning. There's a large learning curve because there's the cataloging and information side, but then there's also the side of developing programming for young people that will help them not only learn to love to read, but continue to love to read. And I don't just want the students to be dependent on me so that once they leave my building, they don't continue that love of reading, that joy for reading. So that's something that I think we can really work on in our profession, is making sure that we don't kill students' love for reading by the things that we assign, and making sure to honor the choices that they make about what they want to read, so that at every step of the way, as they get handed off from elementary to middle, from middle to high school, and then beyond, that they have someone taking their hand and saying, I want to support you in whatever it is that your tastes are, and wherever you are skill-wise. I want to honor your journey, and I want to support you. That's kind of the reading culture that I would like to establish and build, not only in my building, but in as many buildings as possible around me. So that's what drives me, and that's what kept me going. Many people don't know this, but my mom is actually a librarian as well. She was an information systems librarian. But yeah, so that's something that has been a really nice bonding thing for the two of us over the last couple of years.
I always was surrounded by Black men who were literate, right? My grandfather, my uncles. And so once I started teaching, there were all of these narratives about Black boys and their lack of reading engagement. And that wasn't what I knew to be true. And that also wasn't what I knew with the Black boys I was working with. And so that has been pretty consistent through all of my work, right? A belief in Black boys and Black children for their literate lives, and for me to do whatever it takes really to ensure that they can read whatever they want. But I wasn't always that person, right? Like I was pretty traditional in my practice. I too taught pretty canonical text early on in my teaching career. And it was really only over the last decade that I really began to put into practice what I believe about literacy, right? Independent reading and choice, driving engagement, representation, collaboration with really excellent other educators. And so that has been sort of true, right? That's been the marker of like the biggest change in my practice, because before then I was fine. But then, right, once I really started to understand why kids deserve reading lives that they want, and what we as teachers need to do to make sure that we preserve those and remove all barriers, right, then my practice changed in these really powerful ways. And so I think that's sort of why I continue to be a literacy educator, and the things that my beliefs that still hold true, right? I know that Black people are literate. We have always been literate. We have always valued literacy. And I think that that's really important to remember. Like that's been my through line throughout. That's what I'll hold true to. And thinking about like, how do we then prepare children? How do we prepare literacy educators, pre-service teachers to really be able to do that work? And so sort of I circle around the same things, but it's deepened, it's truer. I know why I do the work, why we do the work. So it's really nice to be talking about it right now.
My work is focused on integrating digital tools with literacy. I've always agreed with the idea in literacy for a digital age that, as NCTE says, texts vary in format, genre, and medium. So my work began with the multimodality of writing arguments. It has continued to explore the access of resources in rural areas and has expanded to think more about the cross sections of digital literacy, disciplinary literacy, and social justice, as well as professional development to achieve those goals. I have explored such texts such as Pokemon Go and have helped encourage teachers to not only see these as important capital for their students, but to bring them into the classroom in effective ways.
In 2006, the National Council of Teachers of English began developing a definition of 21st century literacies to serve as a guide or framework for the ways in which literacy was impacted by the changes of society and technology, and ultimately how the work of learners and educators was poised to change. 2 decades later, the definition has shifted to a definition of literacy in a digital age, and we reflect on what this definition has meant and will mean to our field.
Now, I have been involved in the definition for 21st century literacies from the very beginning, and when this project had first come up was back, I think it was in 2007, and I was a member, I was a secondary representative at large for the NCTE Executive Committee. And as a part of the work that we were doing that year, we were really trying to figure out and discuss and kind of come to terms with what it means to be literate in the 21st century.
And what brought me to this work around digital literacy was really, I got through it with my work with NCTE. I was on the executive committee years ago when technology in classrooms was new, and I led a group, an inquiry group, subcommittee on the executive committee that really studied digital literacy and what that meant and what our role as a literacy organization was. And that was the year that we developed the first framework. And that was really the year that I learned. I went into the committee really not seeing the power of this. I had taught primary and I saw a lot of bad things happening with technology, just a lot of skill and drill and a lot of things that it just didn't seem purposeful to me. But when we worked on this committee together with the other people on the committee who really influenced my thinking, I really started to see how literacy was actually evolving because of digital tools. And I started to see the importance of making sure we did right by kids by creating experiences with digital tools that were authentic and that really were about reading and writing and not about skill and drill. So that's how I got into the work. And then ever since I kind of bought in, which was probably 20 years ago, I've just been learning and learning and learning. And I think for me, the big issue is what this means for young children, especially those learning to read. I don't think we've seen the effects of all of that yet. So for me, I'm really interested in especially grades 3 to 6, where kids are, they know how to read, but they're still really developing as readers and writers. And so they come to literacy now with different skills than they did when I started teaching. So that's been really interesting work for me.
I began actively investigating digital or online literacies as early as 1999 with then teacher, now Professor Donna Mahar. I'm fascinated by how rapidly things have changed over that time span. And I'm really grateful for the 2019 statement from NCTE, both for its content and for the title change, for a move from talk of 21st century literacies to literacy for a digital age, which seems to me to be a really smart change, given that a lot of the students in my current classes, those who are new to the university and hoping to become teachers, have actually been born after the turn of the century that sort of anchors that 21st century phrase. It seems to me that there is a shelf life to it, and that the fact that they are younger than the phrase might be a key tell for us.
And so, with that, I've been asked to think a little bit about this idea of literacy in a digital age, the revised position statement from the National Council of Teachers of English. And one of the things that just stands out right at the beginning of that position statement is this. The world demands that a literate person possesses and intentionally applies a wide range of skills, competencies, and dispositions. These literacies are interconnected, dynamic, and malleable. There are a number of key ideas in those two short sentences. The one I'm going to pick up on is this idea of being dynamic. And the question that I think we need to ask ourselves right now is, in what ways are we promoting students' dynamic literacies? Sadly and unfortunately, literacies are not always dynamic inside of school, both in terms of the assignments that we give students and what we expect them to create as a result of it. I can tell you that during pandemic times, even as my students, my own students, children here in this household were shifting into emergency remote teaching and learning, we had many things that they would print. I would grab off my printer here and hand to them, and then they would take a picture and scan it and send it back. That is still somewhat happening here in the fall, and it does continue to make me wonder, what are we asking our students to consume? What are we asking our students to create? And when I think about that piece of the NCT definition, that idea that literacies are dynamic, I wonder to what extent we are actually making opportunities for literacy to be dynamic in school.
When I was teaching in my classroom, when I was a middle grades and high school teacher, I was often at the intersection of literacy and technology, or English and technology. Whenever initiatives came through my district, I was one of the first people that signed up, or one of the first people that was asked to get involved. That has guided me in my path as a scholar, as a researcher, and as I continue to be an educator, trying to strive to help pre-service teachers, but also K-12 teachers, and then most importantly, K-12 students. In initial research talks, we would often say that the internet is the dominant text of our generation. And I've continuously been trying to figure out what it really means to be literate, or what it means to be an individual in a society where the internet is the dominant text of our generation. When we first started talking about this at presentations or at conferences or in publications, we would receive a fair amount of pushback for this indication that the internet is the dominant text of our generation. Now, 20 odd years into this moment, we realize that technology, these digital practices, these digital texts and tools are ubiquitous across society. I speak to you now in a video. I'm speaking to you through a screen because we are in the middle of the coronavirus as it roils its way around our globe. And many of our interactions, if not all of our interactions, are happening through webcams and through screens and through these digital pipelines that connect our planet. So we really need to consider the power involved, the investment in, the preparation for these digital spaces, and how we prepare individuals to be not only successful, but more importantly, survive in a digitally connected global system. One of the challenges that I also have about this moment is that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when we would present at conferences and we would think about the role of the internet in our classroom, we would be considerate of the fact that the internet is drastically changing most aspects of society, but it really had little difference or made little change happen in our classrooms. And 5-10 years ago, we would spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to better address these changes in literacy and these changes in technology in our classroom, so we could better prepare teachers and better prepare students for their futures. Sadly, over the last couple of years, it seems like we've moved on from that desire. We haven't really addressed the changes. We haven't really made changes to prepare students, better prepare teachers for this environment. We've moved on to a focus in other areas. In education, there are always more important areas to consider and prepare for, other areas to adjust pedagogy and think about better ways to engage with learners. But at the same time, I don't think that we have done the best job that we can to prepare individuals, all individuals, to be literate in these times. So as we continue to move into this 21st century, my concern is that we take literacy for a digital age to be a granted, to assume that because someone is born at a certain date, it means they are more proficient at being digitally literate. We know that this is not the case. We know that just because someone was born in the agricultural age or the industrial age or a specific age does not mean that they have a propensity to operate a plow or operate some form of machinery just because they were born during that time period. Literacy is an individual practice, it is a contextualized practice, it's something that we need to identify opportunities to support all individuals and figure out better ways to allow them to, or create space or hold space for them to be literate in and out of these different spheres.
The literacy for a digital age work has impacted me as a scholar and a teacher who again has been doing this work for a career. But it's impacted me, the revision of the document, the most recent revision, in a way that has encouraged me to take risks. It's encouraged me to be bolder. It's encouraged me to say that it's not enough that we connect kids with digital tools and social media in our English classrooms. It's not enough that we create opportunities to connect and create and collaborate. That what we need to do is destabilize. We need to question. We need to critique. We need to think about who has access and who doesn't have access and why that's the case and what we can do about it as a community. We need to learn how to learn. We need to make subject English, whatever that is, dangerous because of the text that we're reading, because of the text that we're creating. I think that this is, the definition of 21st century literacies was focused on helping us to shift, I think, from Web 1.0, where we had lots of information we were getting from the tools and the internet, and Web 2.0, where we were creating content, to this place where we were creating content that could start to do work. But we kept that bounded, and we kept that pretty safe, right? We still had Fakebook and tweets that didn't go anywhere, and we created Insta-like things. And what I think this document does is it calls us to break all of that down and to say instead, we create real content that does real work. We create content that helps to persuade people in our communities to do very different things on behalf of and for everyone inside of our communities. That's a dangerous subject English, but it's a necessary move for our field.
21st century literacies are the critical dispositions, knowledges, and multimodal coding skills used in an increasingly networked, digital, and transcultural world. We've moved from literacy as a set of discrete languaging skills to a set of social practices. In more recent years, we've seen a shift from multiliteracies to multimodalities and semiotics that are rooted in visual literacies. So, for example, murals continue to be important expressions and sites of collective memory and social protest. Internet memes and the intertextuality of social media talk are common means of discourse that both youth and communities of all ages engage in. For me in particular, I am most intrigued by the ambivalent role of oracy and the spoken word in our lives. On the one hand, in dominant Western cultures, we have shifted from a teacher-centered rote learning to a student-centered emphasis on dialectic learning and the importance of dialogue for democracy. On the other hand, with globalization and personalized digital learning, storytelling and sacred worship traditions in indigenous and marginalized cultures are challenged to reinvent themselves in the online medium. Inequitable access to electricity, to the internet and mobile technology, they can also uphold barriers and recreate new ones. So in regards to the book and critical conversation, we must think about what this looks like online. How do best practices for synchronous and asynchronous learning align with principles of critical conversations? How can we implement culturally responsive online education? So these are the types of questions to consider as we move into this prolonged virtual teaching and learning space that we're not quite sure, when it's going to end. But we need to be thinking about at the same time, how can we be enacting equity and empowering youth and teachers alike to engage in critical conversations?
When I think about the opportunities that this definition has given to our kids, and really to our teachers as well. So as a district administrator, I spend a lot of time thinking about how do I support teachers in the classroom and how do I support kids in their learning. And this definition has basically provided opportunities for teachers to think differently about their traditional literacy practices.
I think we have to ask the question, when we say our students, who do we mean? In my experience, Black and brown students, especially those in schools people view as under or low performing, where there's more emphasis on policing students' bodies and teaching compliance, discipline, and order, or teaching to the test, those students are not afforded the same kinds of freedoms to use digital tools and technologies for creation and production. And often the messages that they receive as soon as they walk into a school building is that their social media, their technology, their digital tools, that those are not permitted, that they must put those away as soon as they enter the school building. So the message is that teaching and learning does not engage or does not involve the kinds of technologies that you use and that you see others in the world using in order to advance society.
I think the ability to use available designs to design and to achieve a redesign, such as the New London Group thought with multiliteracies, is still a unique affordance provided to us by digital tools. However, I'm more concerned with ever with what Jenkins termed the participation gap. In other words, even though our students have more access than ever to digital tools, there's a great difference in their ability to use these tools and the power of that experience, depending on the support and other research sources provided, such as how much ownership they have in these tools and their ability to connect with a network.
Started teaching 34 years ago. It was hard work as a teacher to find authentic audiences for our students. It was really hard to find authentic reasons for our kids to write other than writing for the classroom or the school or their families. Every so often we'd get something published in a newspaper, but really to have authentic audiences and for kids to see other kids' work in public spaces, that just didn't happen. So I think that opportunity is huge. I think our students are growing up, even as primary, first, second, and third grade students. They've seen YouTube videos that 5-year-olds have a channel. They've seen lots of social media, lots of things where young children have a voice. And so I think that's a huge opportunity. I think our children are growing up in a space where they know they have a voice and where they know they have an audience. And I think it's really important that we build on that. I think they come to us knowing what's possible. They also come to us having lots and lots of mentor texts. I think when I started teaching, my students had lots of experiences with books, but now they have lots of experiences with books and videos and, lots and lots of different media. So, and I think they want to create those. So I think they come to us with all of that. And that's a huge opportunity if we take it as one.
There are many words to describe the tremendous impact of the year of 2020 on classrooms, students, teachers, families, and communities. And it's clear that our field has so much work to do. So what's next?
I don't know that there's too many new ones, but I think that there's ones that we just have never really paid attention to, right? Like, have we ever really thoughtfully, strategically, methodically addressed issues of bias and race in education? Have we really, right? And so I think that is definitely a pressing issue. How it's present in all of our content areas and all of our school systems and just even instructional methods, all of it. So I think that for me might be the most pressing. But I don't know, what do y'all think? I think there are other ones too that are really important.
Lorena, I think it's that. I think that the ways in which our educational system has been set up to privilege some and marginalize others is the single pressing issue. I love the way that you framed it in saying that there's nothing, it's not new, this is not a new issue, right? That this is baked in and at the foundation of what our system looks like. I mean, if you think about public education in the United States and, for example, Indian residential schools and how their whole purpose was to assimilate and to wipe out, really through cultural genocide, the native people who were here. That legacy still continues in our school systems now when we think about the ways in which young children who come from diverse and rich cultural backgrounds are forced to assimilate into ways of being that are really predominantly white culture. And it's done now with a smile, of course, and it may not be done through physical force. Well, actually, that's debatable, because I think that we can also see the disproportionate ways that Black and brown children are disciplined in schools and sometimes physically disciplined in schools. So I think what you said is true. When we think about literacy, I think the literacy that I think we always not forget about that, but that has not been amplified and centered is racial literacy. There is no literacy without racial literacy, because we are all racialized beings in this country from the start. And when we do not understand how our racialized identities impact the way we read, the choices we make as educators, the way we treat our students in our classrooms, then we are functionally illiterate as teachers.
Yeah.
Kim, what about the issue though of standardized testing?
Yeah, I mean,
I see it as part of all of it, but I know that there are people thinking that is a pressing issue.
Yeah, I mean, not for me, right? I just think that like the pressing, if we were sort of like to take a step back and even to think about pressing issues, I think it's a lack of like imagination. One, and I've said this, right? We know everything we need to know to really equalize public education. We do. We've always known. We just choose not to do it. And so it's that people don't want to change it. And so we know, right, what drives literacy practice, the best literacy practice, and yet we're still here talking about the canon wars, right? We're still talking about people take up all the air about why they want to teach Huck Finn, right? Instead of thinking about like what kind of citizens are we trying to raise? Like who do we want to send out of our schools? We want to send out literate young people, right? And we know that kids are reading in all of these ways that are really powerful outside of school, right? Kids are super literate, but when they come into school, right, standardized tests and everything else, they don't, because we want them to read these particular texts in particular ways. And it's freedom. We don't want kids to be free, right? And we're gonna like fight. People are just gonna like adhere so tightly to what we know is not best practice or culturally sustaining practice or what is right for kids. And once again, right, Black and brown kids lose. But we know what we need to do. We just choose not to do it. So, I mean, I feel like that's where I always start, and that people just don't want to do it. So we're going to be here unless we do something different.
And I'll add to that and say that the school systems that we have now, the majority of them are not humanizing spaces. They are dehumanizing spaces where students feel, even students in the most ideal conditions, perhaps upper or upper middle class families with parents who have all of these degrees, students in those environments still feel like school is not for them. They know how to do school, but they don't like it. And so then you're killing that innate curiosity that's within young people, and you're also killing the ability for them to go on as adults and be critical thinkers and continually examining self and the role that they have in the world of either upholding and the responsibility for dismantling oppressive systems. So that dehumanizing process, I think is a huge vehicle through which people's power, personal power, is taken away. And that's why, that's a lot of the reason why we have the situation that we have right now.
Yeah, and I think that people are just so resistant to listen to children, young people, right? It's just kind of amazing how we don't center their needs, their voices, their experiences, because again, right, like they might not be necessarily communicating in ways that our adult selves are willing to sort of understand, but they know what's best for them, and we should do it. Like, we should listen to them.
If I had to share 2 lasting takeaways of the research in Good Fit for me, I would say 1, that collectives of teachers, researchers, and community members need to do the work together. And that those roles often blur, that those aren't necessarily distinct groups, those 3 that I just mentioned. That work isn't going to get done, individual teachers one at a time. And similarly, it can't be top down, it can't be mandated. It has to be taken up by people who feel urgency and feel commitment to each other. The second thing I would say is that curriculum matters, and that it takes time, effort, and iteration to get it right.
What does it mean to use Dr. Marcel Haddox's phrase, to go for broke, to think about what it is that we might do that is completely revolutionary or pushing our field in a new and different way? And here's what I'd say. I don't know that this is completely revolutionary, and yet the circumstances that we find ourselves in now, if not giving us explicit permission to do so, certainly allow for things that we may have previously not conceived were useful, timely, or possible. And so here it is. I would strongly encourage you, if you are a 5th grade language arts teacher working on a poetry unit, if you are an 8th grade language arts teacher trying to introduce your students to the forms of argumentation, if you are a high school English teacher having students read and analyze Shakespeare and write a literary analysis, if you are pushing your students more towards civic engagement through blogging and podcasting and creating social media posts, whatever the assignment is, whatever the opportunity it is that you're having your students engage in as readers and writers, and listeners and viewers and visually representing their work in different ways, whatever these opportunities are during this very unique year of 2020-2021, where so many students are learning remotely or in some kind of hybridity, some fashion that requires them to use these devices more and more. Here's the challenge. Co-teach, co-plan, co-learn with someone else, probably someone else outside of your school, and have those students connect and do something compelling and interesting and engaging.
I hate that I have to say this in the year 2020. Can we
Right.
start listening to our teachers?
Amen.
I mean, that shouldn't sound so revolutionary.
Right.
Especially now, our teachers have been doing everything in their power to continue teaching, connecting, and meeting the needs of these students, despite policies and expectations and the structures that are at risk of hindering all of their efforts. Teachers know what works and they know what doesn't, and they know their students. But it seems so often, even today, those in a position of power just refuse to listen. And that needs to change. We're losing some incredible educators.
Yes, we are.
It really should not be this way.
I agree with you 100%. We have to start listening to our teachers.
Friends, we've had this same conversation about this for 20 years, for my career. We've been talking about access. We've been talking about digital divide, secondary digital divide, tertiary digital divide. I mean, as many different layers of it as we can imagine. We've been working on this, allegedly, for a really, really long time. And it feels completely unacceptable that we are at the place where we are at. And I think the only way we fix it is by being absolutely unrelenting in our persistence and in our demand that school not be a place where some kids get fed in this way and other kids get fed in this way. We have to say, that digital tools, access to wireless connections, that access to curriculum that actually levers the possibility in these things are non-negotiables, and that anything less than that is something we reject as teachers. We've got to work with companies and communities to figure out ways to get things done, not just on paper, but in people's lives. And not just as a momentary fix or something that we brand as altruistic, but as something we find to be absolutely necessary. We should be so unmoored by the inequity that we see right now that we can't imagine a possible next step that doesn't solve it, and solve it deeply by seeing and valuing every kid and every community.
So what's next? That's a good question. We're in a moment of change, a moment of transformation. If people are not ready to let go of the antiquated ideas that hinder the growth of some children while advancing the privileges and resources of others, then I don't know what's next. We live in a country where half of its citizens vote for racism, where half of its citizens vote for oppression of some people, where half of our citizens vote against all lives mattering. If literacy educators do not see this as part of their work, that is working against oppressive systems and policies within and beyond our school communities, those that are anti-Black, anti-immigrant, anti-queer, anti-disability, anti-climate change, I could go on and on. If literacy educators do not see this as part of the work, then I just don't know.